Hello there, and welcome once again to the White Lotus of Light conversational series. I am thrilled and honored to have my good friend and just a wonderful human being who just has such incredible knowledge, Phillip Jimenez.
Oh,
Phillip, how are you doing today, brother? Other than I will tell you, we're
I'm
not going to have any video for Phillip today for technical reasons, but we have this lovely picture of him so you can still fawn over his handsomeness.
yeah. Oh, um, yeah. Well, the reason is, well, first of all, it's 5 o'clock in the morning here in Ulaanbaatar, and I had bought a new apartment, but it's not ready. It's still under construction, so I'm staying. It's a very dingy. There's nothing nice in here. Everything is just kind of, all my stuff is just kind of thrown in here, and it's sort of interim. And when I get into the new place, then it'll be nice and we can have the video again. So this is just for this time. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you indulging me in this because
Oh,
I look terrible and there's nothing,
well,
there's
that
no
picture looks
nice
good.
background or anything.
So that picture looks good. So you knocked it out of the park on that. Well, so we're gonna be doing here, folks, today. This episode is for all the people who say Ian talks too much. This episode is for you because I'm hardly gonna talk in this episode per your request. You think I talk too much? Fair point. I do talk a lot. So Philip's going to be doing the lion's share, just like last time. Many people didn't seem to understand in the last video. Philip was in New York on vacation visiting his friend, and he requested of me to do 90% of the talking. So I do talk too much, but that time I didn't. That time I was requested by Philip himself to do the majority of the lifting so he could enjoy time with his family. So today, Philip's going to be doing the heavy lifting. I'm just going to real quick say that I'm going to be doing a video very soon that pertains to a lot of the themes we talk about in the Black Nobility series, namely the Molochian versus Luciferian faction, the coming into the Kali Yuga, and some astrological correspondences and some movements in cryptocurrencies and other high-tech realms that point towards the Luciferian faction laying the groundwork for their takeover from the Molochians. So I should have that out hopefully by Halloween. I think that'd be a good week to put it out. But I still haven't finished editing and uploading part 2 of my Mark Stavish interview. And then I want to have this excellent episode today. And also, Philip asked me to say one more thing, and then he's going to launch into it. Today, we're talking about the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, which were two factions in Italy in medieval times that loosely correspond, I think, to the Molochian and Luciferian factions I talk about today. And Philip's going to fill in, but this is a vast topic. And the episode today is very heavily historical based, but I think it will show you the roots of some of the internecine conflicts we see in the Black nobility, and also just sort of like modern historical events are always rooted in the past, and if you know the past, it makes it a little bit easier to know the future because past does tell future. And so, with that, Philip, today I'm gonna get out of the way and let you launch into it. So tell us about the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And again, this won't be an exhaustive episode on that. Philip wanted me to be very clear on that. He's going to do a summation on certain aspects of it. So Philip, please take it away.
Yeah, great introduction. You tie it in very well. Um, yeah, I mean, people should know this is really a discussion. Uh, we all have to chip in and try to reach a clearer understanding of the issues that are at play. I really don't want this to seem academic or abstract or esoteric in any way. We are trying to solve real life problems. I don't I don't know if people know. I'm not an historian. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a researcher, and I apologize if I
I will.
mangle things today. But the whole point, I came to Ulaanbaatar in 2014, and my goal was to set up an international law center that would eventually give rise maybe to tribunals and conferences and discussions and everything. And I just thought, oh, everyone's going to go for this. You know, everyone knows the international legal institutions in the West are corrupt, and everyone's going to be so excited about creating something new from the ground up in a politically neutral environment and with fairness and objectivity. Everyone's going to love it, and it's going to be so easy. And I found that I really hit a lot of brick walls. I'm still going. I'm still intent on putting this together. But in terms of, you know, I thought, well, you know, what is going on? What is really going on? And why am I having any difficulties at all putting this together? And that led me down various rabbit holes. I mean, starting with 9/11 and going from there and drilling down and trying to see how the world is really put together. And then I came across the Black Nobility, and then you know, as you and I were talking, we were talking about this duality that seems, you know, it's kind of murky and swirling around. And as you see it with the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, you see a great deal of murkiness and personal internecine or feuds between families, and it's an extremely complex topic. And we got into the Guelphs and the Ghibellines because I said I really sense that there's some kind of fundamental dichotomy at the very top. Mm-hmm. And you put it in terms of the Molochian faction and the Luciferian, and I had been looking at it in terms of Prometheus and Zeus. Prometheus representing the creative initiative of spirit of the human being that's inherent in all of us. And, you know, he steals fire from the gods. What is that but owning one's creative potential? Right. And then Zeus on the other side representing the oligarchy. And we see over human history, you see this collision or this conflict, that's perpetual between the creative initiative of man, of people, of our potential as a community, a human community, but as individuals also. And then we feel this oppressive weight coming from somewhere. And they've gotten good. The oppressive weight, the oppressors, I don't like to put things in, this is kind of primitive terminology, but they've done very well at hiding themselves behind these terms like conspiracy theory, right? Conspiracy. If you dig, if you start to connect dots, then you have psychological problems, which is, you know, very clever. It's a very clever ruse. And then, you know, finding that the sorts of people they say were in charge, this is not it. You know, these are not the people. It isn't Bill Gates. It isn't George Soros. It isn't even the Queen of England. So we were drilling down, and then I stumbled across, I'd seen it crop up from time to time, this Guelph and Ghibelline battle. And I thought, well, you know, I can explore this. And it just explodes. This topic just explodes. I mean, I've got so many notes, and it was impossible to find everything in one place.
Right.
You know, I thought, well, I could maybe one-stop shop. I can get an overview of exactly what happened and what's behind it, but that wasn't the case at all. I had to kind of piece it together from many sources what it was really about. And I found Dante Alighieri as being a central figure in all of this, which was quite interesting to me because my son had been reading a lot of,
right, as in Dante's Inferno, the great author. Just for folks who don't know that name.
Yeah, it's throughout the Divine Comedy, the Commedia. He goes into this conflict as it played out in Florence. Florence was kind of the most important center, became the ruling center in Tuscany
Mm.
during that time for many reasons. There was it gained access to the Via Francigena, which was an ancient road and a sort of trade route and pilgrimage route that went from Canterbury all the way through France and through Switzerland, interesting, over the Alps, and it went down through Italy, down through Rome and Apulia, and so Florence became part of this route, and that, of course, greatly enhanced its potential, its economic potential.
Can I ask real quick, Philip, just so viewers can kind of zero in on the era we're talking about? I know it stretches over a considerable length of time. Approximately, and it doesn't have to be precise, but approximately what time period from when to when was this conflict so central, do you think?
Um, well, what these terms come from?
Okay.
Um, the terms Guelfi, Ghibellini, these terms didn't really come into use until about 1240,
Mm.
but you know, as sort of labels given to these parties. But I would say people say that I don't think there's any doubt about this. It comes from uh, the death of Emperor Henry V in 1125, and then you had the Welfen, who were a Bavarian noble house, versus fighting with the Saxon Swabian Hohenstaufen, who were
Mm.
the lords of the castle of Weiblingen or Weibeling castle, where they get the word Ghibelline. So the Welfen was sort of italicized to become Guelphi, and then the castle where the Hohenstaufen, who was the ruling family, still a powerful family, at the castle of Weiblingen or Wibeling, contesting the crown at that point, and then this struggle. So the Bavarian Welfen were pro-papal, and the Hohenstaufen, of course, pro HRE, the Holy Roman Empire.
Can I ask then real quick, Philip, would you say, just so people get a little more concrete stuff before you expand out, Guelphs and Ghibellines, and you pronounce it much better than I. The Guelphs are papal, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. They're pro-papal.
They're pro-papal, and the Ghibellines are pro-Holy Roman Emperor. And so then, which one is sort of the Promethean faction, and which one is the sort of more Molochian faction? I'm assuming the papacy is the more Molochian, like pressing down
Yeah,
on human advancement. Okay, so
yeah,
the Guelphs are Molochian, pro-papacy. The Ghibellines are pro-Holy Roman Emperor, pro-commerce, pro-Promethean or Luciferian advancement. Is that accurate?
yeah. I would say roughly that would correspond. I think certainly a lot muddier than that. I don't want to
Right.
make things.
I'm just trying to give people something to grasp on while still understanding that this is a history that's been very obfuscated very intentionally. All history since World War II has, in my opinion, been massively, massively edited and massively, massively altered, not least of which is information about the Black nobility. Joseph Farrell talked about how it was nigh impossible to find out a ton of things, and he's a master researcher. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, you just have to use a patchwork quilt work of various different sources, and really the only real information you'd have to, if it's even still there, would be in the Venetian archives, really, or perhaps the Florentine archives in this case. So please continue. I just wanted to give the viewers a little something to little skeletal structure before you add all the meat and sinew and whatnot.
Um, yeah, but it needs to be understood that the just because we say this is the pro-papal party doesn't mean that they were especially devout Christians or motivated by
Right.
deep religious impulses. No, it had. I mean, we have to remember that in Florence at this time, the pro-papal party were bankers to the Pope, and there was a lot of money. This was the biggest bank account in Europe, and so you had this alliance between the the papacy from a powerful banking uh, perspective, and then you had the the usurious banking hub of Venice, aligned with the Angevin government, French government that was ruling in England and France, which provided sort of the military muscle. So it was very similar to what I think we see today,
Mm-hmm.
where you had the most cynical kinds of banking practices allied with the Pope, or with Rome, whatever that represents to people. Doesn't have much to do with Catholicism.
Right.
And you have this muscle provided by the French kings, Charles of Valois, who was called upon by the Pope to intervene at one point in Florence. So that's what we're looking at. The Holy Roman Empire, I would say, yeah, later on, beyond where we're talking right now, Dante wrote a very famous, one of his most famous works. It's apparently, it's not poetic at all. It's very flat prose, but it's very elegant and a very beautiful statement on the human condition and what we ought to be aiming for, De Monarchia, which some people see in this book that he's simply promoting the rule by empire and the Holy Roman Emperor, and that he's hearkening back, and he's just a paean he's writing a paean to the Roman Empire, going back to the Roman Empire. But this isn't true at all. He's really urging people to try to understand their roles as citizens, and what is the creative capacities in the individual, and isn't it the job of, in other words, he's not prescribing a form of government or a mechanism of government that is better than any others. He's saying they all governments, forms of government, all seek the same thing. And what is that? It's the maximization, the optimization of the creative potential within that society. And then the individuals within that society have a responsibility to give something back. He writes about how,
Right.
we're the beneficiaries of so much that came before us, and so much knowledge and learning, and that if we don't exert ourselves to give something back, then he writes, we're very much in arrears. So I would say, interestingly, Dante was not a Ghibelline. He was a Guelph, but he was a white Guelph, and this is something that's often left out when you go see the usual treatment about the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. It becomes so complex. I think people just sort of try to make it simple.
Right.
In fact, later on, when the Guelphs defeat the Ghibellines definitively in it's like 1289, Um,
That's,
then you had a fracturing of the Guelph party into the whites and the blacks,
mm.
and the blacks, the Bianchi, and the Neri, the blacks.
Can I
And then,
interject just for a
yeah,
second?
yeah, jump in.
I just want to say that date is so interesting to me because it's within about less than 30 years of the Templar suppression. And just this entire era that we're talking about is during the Albigensian Crusades in southern France, which involved the French king and also, of course, the Vatican. And I just see that, like, it's interesting to me that the Guelphs defeat, you say, conclusively the Ghibellines, right? Which is that Promethean Luciferian
Mhm.
kind of faction. In my estimation, my words, not yours. And I would include the Templar in that Luciferian impulse. And the same thing with the Cathars in southern France, who were suppressed during the Albigensian Crusade. And so you see during this time period a real consolidation of power among the Molochian faction in an attempt to stamp out this Luciferian impulse, which of course would then reemerge like a phoenix from the ashes with Cosimo Medici releasing the Hermetica and then the Renaissance in Florence. Please continue. I just wanted to interject that little nugget for people to make that connection as well about this time period and how important it is. Please continue.
Wow, that's a very interesting perspective. As you know, I'm fascinated by uh, the Knights Templar and everything. I'm completely unfamiliar with it, and although I'm fascinated with it, I don't resonate with any of it, and so it's kind of like looking at this something very
Oren?
and I think yes, and I think that's one avenue that we should pursue. Like anything that you have to add. I mean, what you're talking about, um, that these things are happening at the same time. I find that to be very telling, and I'm completely
Within a
ignorant
few
of.
within a few decades of each other, it's just like you have Giordano Bruno getting killed, and then you have the
Ah,
emergence of the Rosicrucians. I mean, that's hundreds of years from the time period that we're talking about now, right?
mm-hmm.
But I'm just saying, like, it's interesting to me when you see this, and you keep seeing this phenomenon in history. In my opinion, of this Luciferian or Promethean impulse, which is increasing over time, right? As we move to the Dwarp Yuga. Again, that's my working model and theory. I'm not saying Phillip is saying this or that it's objective fact. It's just my working model is that we're moving into the Dwarp Yuga. 2025 is when the crossover begins. And so, ever since the time of King Solomon, when we reached that nadir of the lowest point of human consciousness, or right around the time of King Solomon, consciousness has been moving upwards. And so, therefore, the Molochians have been consolidating power, but there's been more and more of these little blips or these green shoots of this Promethean, Luciferian kind of impulse of, increasing the material well-being of humanity, spirituality, sort of liberty, meritocracy, as opposed to top-down control, that kind of impulse. And you keep seeing to where it pops up and then it gets hammered down by the Molochian faction, who is still dominant, and then it pops up again a little bit later. And so the Templar were suppressed in 1312. That really to me ties into this exact same time period, and I'm forgetting
Oh,
exactly when the
exactly.
Albigensian Crusade takes place, but I know it's in the 1200s, prior to the suppression of the Knights Templar. I'm going to look it up while you continue to you were talking about the black and white factions within the Guelphs after the defeat of the Ghibellines in 1289.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was at the Battle of Campaldino, and Dante was fighting in that conflict at the age of 24,
Wow.
and he writes a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the beauty of Dante is that you have someone who was very politically involved and very astute and very much believed in everyone contributing in the best possible way from the depths of their creative potential to make the world a better place. If you don't understand this about Dante, you can't understand Dante. He has been kind of denatured, I would say, by literary criticism of the 20th century, T.S. Eliot among others, who generally just try to remove these dimensions from Dante and simply address his poetic method.
Right.
And so what we get is like all of this stuff opened up for me. You know, my son was getting very interested in Dante, and I was kind of puzzled. Like, what's so? When my son gets fascinated with something that I didn't tell him to get fascinated with, you know, he did it completely on his own. I'm like, what is it? What is with this? What's this fascination? And now it's kind of opening up to me, and so he and I are having more discussions about this. That let's see, where I kind of got off track there. What was I
talking about Dante about? And then the black and white
oh right. So
of the Guelphs after their defeat of the Ghibellines, you said in 1289.
1289. But in the Divine Comedy, he talks about where this got started. The whole thing between starting with the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, going back to 1215. There was a feud between these families, the Amadei family and Buondelmonte. And Buondelmonti, this family, the Buondelmonti family, young man, he was planning to get to marry a daughter of the Amadei family, and as a kind of a way of working out a feud between settling the score between these two families. There had been some fighting, and someone was injured. I'm a little vague on I'm a little vague on a lot of this, but it's coming together. But one of the a matriarch, I suppose, from the Donati family goes to Buondelmonte and says, "How come on, you don't want to marry this girl. This is going to do nothing for you. You should marry my daughter. Our family is much more important. What are you doing?" And she actually convinces him to ditch this poor girl on their wedding day. And you can imagine what kind of for him to unilaterally make a decision like this after the family elders had already met and decided that this was the way things were going to be worked out. This was an absolute affront, and it aroused the deepest kind of family. What this would do. It absolutely drove them into a frenzy. And then on Easter, I think it was 1216, several young men from the Amadei family and Uberti family, Buondelmonte is riding down the Ponte Vecchio, and he's all dressed in white, and he's going by the statue of Mars, which Mars is the god of Florence, by the way. They believe that the Florence was founded by the god Mars. So in this moment, he's going down the Ponte Vecchio, there's the statue of Mars, and they all jump on him and they knock him off his horse, and they stab him and he bleeds to death. And then this is really what starts the Guelph and Ghibelline conflict. Then everything erupts. So you had these parties beforehand, but they weren't called the Guelphs and Ghibellines. Everything erupted at that point, and it became a hot conflict. So, there's no ideology, there's no philosophy. It's just wealthy families causing problems and having feuds. Very much like, I guess, you would see in Romeo and Juliet, which kind of mirrors this, actually. So that's 1216, and then Dante is born in 1265. So he's born into the middle of this, and his family was Guelph, but at this point you have the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs, and then you get into a conflict between two other families. Although um, what happens is once you have you have there was a family, the Concilieri family in nearby Pistoia, and a big merchant family, very wealthy, but they had an internal problem between the children of the first wife and the children of the second wife. And this is where I understand that the white and black labels came to be applied, because one of two things: the older wife was named Bianca, or and then the other one took the name of Neri just to oppose, or I heard that the children of the first wife were older, so they had white hair, so therefore they were called the whites, or the Bianchi, and then the younger ones were called the Neri. And this was such a serious problem. They had a big force of all the young men in this family. There was it posed a threat to the stability of the region, and because Florence was kind of the biggest power at the time, they had to take an interest in what was going on. They thought, well, we'll settle this issue. We'll help them sort this out. Well, it kind of went sideways, because they brought the heads of these two factions to Florence. But what happened? The whites went with the Cerchi family, and the blacks went with the Donati family. And the Cerchi, by this time, they were kind of like nouveau riche merchant merchant class people who had risen, and they had become quite successful. But they moved into the Donati territory. The Donati were the kind of, what did they say, più antichi de sangre or something. They felt that they were the older family. They were more urbane, more sophisticated. They considered themselves on a higher level than the Cerchi. But the fact that the Cerchi had more money, this caused great animosity. And the Donati family were very classic, kind of what you would consider typical black nobility. You know, powerful, cynical, the use of force, the head of the family of the.
Tie it back in again. Is that the blacks or the whites that were the classical black nobility?
The blacks, the black.
Makes sense, right? They made it easy for us, Philip. Go ahead.
Yeah. So these are the blacks, the black nobility at this point, which, because I'd heard different things about why the black nobility are called the black nobility. Everything from, well, this was when the everything from, well, their descendant, many of the families actually originate from the Black Sea region, to, well, this is the reflection of the nature of their foul deeds against the human community. Everything to, well, they were sympathetic with the Pope, and when the Pope was confined himself to Vatican City to protest the new government in Italy, they sided with him and they closed their windows, and so they were called black nobility. But at any rate, I'm not really sure. I know that in this case, this is what black referred to. They were very pro-papal, but in a very cynical, after a very cynical fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so um, at this point, it isn't a conflict between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines anymore. This is now a conflict between the blacks and the whites. And Dante, at, I think first he was a prior in about 1300,
Mm-hmm.
and then he was on the Council of 100, and he actually was instrumental in exiling the top leaders of both factions because things had gotten so insane in Florence. Because it's fairly evenly divided between these factions. So he's you see a picture of Dante that doesn't come through the usual approach through his literature. You see someone who's deeply involved in actually himself. He is exiled in 1302.
Mm-hmm.
He, as a white Guelph, eventually teams up with Ghibelline factions and tries to retake the city, which is that's Dante's banished around, well, I think it's 1302,
Mm-hmm.
and he creates this new alliance between the White Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and he's traveling from city to city. He has no permanent residence, except there's a time he stays for a while in Verona. But he recruited, he was advising and organizing, and in 1304 he was able to conclude a Ghibelline white military force that was intent on recapturing Florence, but then they had suffered a terrible defeat at La Lastra, which just outside the city walls of Florence. So another setback. So then he meets with leaders of the whites in Arezzo, and he advises them on what needs to be done next. And then he disappears again. He spends the next year kind of traveling alone. And in his words, he says he became a party unto himself.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is, there's something so beautiful about that, because, and painful. Um, I think it was Solzhenitsyn said something about fascist societies don't like great writers because great writers can be like a government unto themselves.
Mm.
Uh, Look at Tolstoy, for instance. I mean, the Tsar couldn't really do anything to Tolstoy. He became, it would have brought on civil war, right?
Mm.
Tolstoy was a hero,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that a great writer can be a government unto themselves, we see this with Dante.
It's interesting. It's interesting you would say that, because how I would kind of link that into some of the broader themes of when we do this series is that we both talk about the critical importance of the ruling faction controlling the narrative, right? And that's exactly what a great writer will do, or a great poet is, or like the bards who were proto or post Templar, proto Rosicrucian, something like that, who are going around singing about various different things, like Parsifal and the Grail, right? Like the Grail myths and King Arthur and stuff like this. Though putting those themes out there into the world was extremely destabilizing for the central controlling powers, just like Tolstoy was for the Tsar, or Dante was for the papacy and allied factions. I just wanted to throw in that, reminding people the power of the narrative and why the media is so critical, and why being critical, as in critically thinking about the media, is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And the creative potential to affect change within every individual. And the paradox that isn't really a paradox, it's kind of like the Zen koans, I think. Like he said, he became a party unto himself. Well, we normally in modern times we think of somebody who's alienated and has psychological problems. But no, here's someone who has been deeply involved, who's been shaping events, who has been politically astute, who has been also developing himself as a cultural icon, who was a person who basically invented the modern Italian language, who insisted that the vernacular was more powerful and had greater creative potential than Latin. And he insisted on writing. He wrote the De Vulgari Eloquentia, which was in defense of the vernacular, saying, this is really the language. This is the direction we have to go. This is combining dialects from around Tuscany and trying to take the best from here and there and create a modern, vibrant, living Italian language.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, he wrote that in Latin, but that was sort of like his way of making the point with everybody.
Can I interject again for just a second? Because I want to point out another pattern that you can see like throughout history is the importance of language, and how Dante is trying to create a more flexible language that reflects modernity in this movement forward away from Latin, which is more rooted in the Roman imperial past. And the reason that that's relevant today is look at cancel culture, look at this extreme attempt to control language and to redefine very basic things such as man and woman, things which are at the very root of our identity. And it works both ways. Dante was trying to create a more flexible language that opened up the creative potential of people and reflected the modern emerging Italian language that was moving away from that Roman imperial past and in the direction of what would eventually become the Renaissance, right, and the Enlightenment. And as opposed to now, we see the Molochians are making a really last desperate attempt to control the narrative and to destabilize people's sense of identity, in part by massive attacks on the language. And they're attacking the very core of the language, the very most straightforward core biological and scientific facts, such as defining man and woman, redefining them. In order to, once you've done that, if you just attack the core, then you can do all the stuff on the peripheries that our people are going to fight less over. If you can make that initial attack on the core of defining and controlling language, then any additional modifications to language will be much more easily accepted. And I just wanted to point that out because what you're saying, to root it in what's occurring now today, is that Dante was making a huge revolutionary push to change the very way that people communicated, which of course, as the founder of that, would give him a huge edge in terms of him laying claim to his aspect of the emerging new narratives. So
yeah, we see this with censorship as well,
right?
You dumb people down. I've said to you several times. This is one of my pet themes, that you couldn't have gotten away with all the censorship we see on Facebook, etc. 30 years ago, I don't believe, or 20 years ago even. People wouldn't have stood for it. The idea that you let someone else decide for you what is misinformation or not, that you would trust people you didn't know and couldn't see, and you just give that up, and then you feel a kind of idiotic pride at having done so. I think this has been since 9/11, the Patriot Act. This has been just a gradual erosion of what it is to be a responsible adult human individual.
Well, I would argue that it was already happening via consolidation of the media that had occurred in the,
Oh
from
yeah,
the 60s
right.
forward.
Yeah.
It was already occurring. All those principles were already occurring. The difference was it was hidden. Now it's overt because with the rise of the internet in the early 21st century, suddenly information was exploding and spreading like wildfire. And to me, what you're describing, that censorship, is to attempt to put the genie back in the bottle, but having the tracking ability, the back traceability of the internet, along with, and making sure that you're tracking what everyone's saying, along with the old school centralized control. And so I would say what you're saying people wouldn't have stood for, they actually did stand for. They just didn't know it. They didn't realize that the big networks, the newspapers, were being consolidated to an absurd, egregious degree, especially since the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and that that kind of censorship was already occurring. Soft censorship via the editors or producers on various news shows, it was already occurring, but now they have to do a more overt form of censorship because individuals have actually been empowered, which is saying the same thing you're saying, but I think puts it in a more hopeful context, perhaps, that actually, like, it's a response to that they're losing control of the narrative, and that's why they're trying these heavy-handed tactics. And I believe these heavy-handed tactics are not only failing, but are waking people up who are otherwise in a stupor. But I mean, I think we totally agree. I mean, at the end of the day, the main thing is censorship is evil. It's a profound evil, and it has to be opposed on every front. And it seems, to sort of get back on track, it seems Dante was struggling with exactly that, but the 1200s version of it. Would you agree? Or early 1300s version, I suppose, at this point in the timeline.
Yeah, you're certainly right. I mean, you saw at the beginning of our show today, I brought up the idea, this horrible phrase. It just just grates on me whenever I hear conspiracy theory.
Oh yeah,
I get into dust ups with people and I say, look, what's a theory? How do you know? In other words, when you say conspiracy theory, there's the assumption that whatever it is specious and spurious and probably incorrect and guided by some psychological problems. It's like all of that is layered in to this label that's just reflexively applied. And I say you can't determine the truth or falsehood of something by simply applying a label because it seems like other things you've heard about.
Mm-hmm.
And
you know the origin of that phrase, of course, right?
Right. It comes from when CIA realized they had a problem on their hands with the JFK assassination and people not buying into the official version, and they had to counter what might be devastating for the government in the long run by encouraging this kind of like this trope or this kind of
They
meme
call
that
it
they distribute.
the term they use internally is a mental slide, because you start here and you hit it and you go already, you just slide on down like a slide at a child's playground. You slide on down to a predetermined conclusion of falsity or falsehood, like you're saying, without going down all the information. You just immediately skip all that additional information. You totally diffuse it and you move to a predetermined destination of that makes me really uncomfortable. I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance. Click, I'm turning the brain off. I'm eating blue pills.
Right.
Yeah. It's vile.
It's a kind of witchcraft in a way. Where people have completely bypassed Aristotle's was it logical fallacies. I mean, my God, this would be such an obvious one. I don't think he would even have thought of it. The idea that if you can label something based on how it strikes you, and then feel confident that you've established that this is not, it's an untruth.
It's multiple logical fallacies in one, right? Because it's an appeal to authority, trust the experts, trust the science, trust the government, and it's also a poisoning of the well. Anything you say further, it's already been tainted, right? So it's already two of the classic logical fallacies woven into one. It's probably more than that. I would just need to think about it.
Right. Yeah, and then if you think about who were those people who were so dead set against John F. Kennedy and his program of progress for the world that he was, working in Africa with um, who was the my mind is going blank, but before he became in the late 50s, he was more known around the world as someone who was fighting against imperialism. Imperialism is the enemy of freedom. That was his crusade.
Mm-hmm.
And the CIA, I think it was Alan Dulles, what he said, it was like messianic globaloney, he called it. And so everything Kennedy was trying to do, believing that if we can help nations build themselves up, then we can form a community that as a community, we have greater potential to do all kinds of things.
Right.
He didn't, I felt, maybe sometimes I feel he was a bit naive. He didn't know how dark and how dirty. Perhaps I'm completely wrong. Perhaps he was just incredibly daring, and perhaps he had a lot of health problems and was in a lot of pain, or was just really fed up and just really going for it,
Mm-hmm.
thinking like, well, if they get me, they get me. If they don't, they don't. But this faction within the CIA, well, this was the CIA. The CIA was created by MI6, and British intelligence is based on what? The Venetian intelligence. And you had the Venetian party in England, informed by exactly the same dark uh, uh, characters, murky kind of skull and what is it? Cloak and dagger, drugs and slavery and
Blackmail.
bribery and blackmail,
Mm-hmm.
things that Shakespeare was actually writing about and trying to warn the Queen about. You
Mm-hmm.
have so what I'm saying is there's a direct line going all the way back, the way language is being manipulated now, which is horrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
As I have to remind people, well, it's a theory. We don't know if it's true or not. Every so-called conspiracy theory, which is a theory about how more than a couple of people might have set about carrying out some kind of covert action, you have to investigate them individually. Uh,
Right.
right, obvious stuff, but
And
we're
the thing
seeing
is
how.
people always believe in conspiracies, Philip. Always. It's just that only Trump conspires. Only the Russians conspire. Only the Chinese conspire. Only the bad guys conspire. Conspiracy theory says, I don't like that because that would mean that powerful people that I currently trust are up to no good. That's what it really means. Because everybody believes in conspiracies. Everyone understands that the mafia engages in conspiracy, the Cosa Nostra. Everybody understands it. Everybody understands it. Drug dealers have networks, and everybody watches The Wire, and they watch Game of Thrones, and they watch all kinds of different things that just constantly have conspiracies involved in them. Every freaking Marvel comic has some sort of conspiracy with the villain working with lieutenants. I mean, those are so dumb now, they even stripped that out. But all of our literature, all of our films, all of our history, it's right there in your face. It's just that people are like, but not my elites would never do that because they care about me, the little guy they don't even know who exists.
Yeah, it's powerful how they've turned up the emotional content
Pathos.
in people's opinions. Emotion
Pathos.
determines um, everything. And I think, back, you're talking about the mafia. I find that people tend to minimize it almost instinctively. Like when I bring up the power of the mafias today, and I, you know, believe they have far more power than I think they're controlling far more than people have can even suspect. And people have a kind of reflexive instinct to say, "Oh no, no, come on, the mafia, they're not such a big deal anymore. They used to be, but they're not so much. They're small time compared to what they were. And even back then, they were just a bunch of criminals running around enriching themselves. Who cares?" So there's a kind of reflexive need to kind of, without even being aware of it, to protect the narrative as it is. So
I would
you don't know
recommend
why.
pointing out to them the Panama Papers and Putin and all of his money and hiding it, and Russian oligarchs and Chinese oligarchs. Find what they already agree with. Oh, Trump conspired, right? Find out what they already agree with and say, okay, let's talk about this. What do you think about, did Trump conspire to do X, Y, and Z? Even if it's not true, just see if they believe and say, so you do believe in conspiracy theories. That's one of the things I like to do.
Yeah.
I like to point out that everybody believes in conspiracy theories. What they don't like is when you suggest that perhaps they've misplaced their trust, because that would make them a fool.
Right. It's that old quote of Mark Twain, it's easier to fool someone than convince them they have been fooled.
Right.
And people are completely unable to try to back away from an issue and look at it from both sides.
Right.
They're allergic to it. They actually feel virtuous in not doing that, refusing to try to look at things from both sides.
Right. Yeah.
So,
big problem.
This is good. This opens the door, because in the next installment, I'd like to go into, because we're not going to get into it today, and it's just too much. But how the black and white conflict, or the Guelph and echoes of the Guelph and Ghibelline conflict, how they've affected Italian politics and by extension the world since then. I found lots of information about the P2 Lodge and that whole scandal when that erupted. And in Italian politics, the same families, the same problems, just transported into the world of today. And it would be interesting to connect the dots through the late 70s and early 80s as we come up to the present.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like, I had wanted to include some of that today, but it's not doable.
Quick question, Philip. How much more time do you have today for this show? Because we're about.
I have another hour.
You have another hour. That's great. So I'm thinking, Philip, even though it's kind of awkward, and then we can also kind of retrench and get back on track. I think it was all the stuff we were talking about with Dante and tying it forward to modern things like a JFK and like narrative control, language control. Kind of like that's one of the things I really want people to see in this work that we're doing, is that people are like, oh, who cares what happened in 1240 AD in Florence? That's 800 years ago. It's nonsense. Why are these guys even talking about that? No. Everything that's happening today is rooted in events that took place in the past. And in some cases, there's such a direct transference to where it's almost seamless. Like you're saying, you see these same factions that you had in the black and white Guelphs translating into power machinations as recently as the 70s and the 80s in Italy. So, like there's broad themes that continue to be true, such as Dante Alighieri's brilliant stroke of trying to create the modern Italian language, right, to create more flexibility, because Latin is hyper precise, but it's also exceedingly inflexible, which is useful for engineering. And I mean, look at the engineering marvels of the Romans. But it limits you in terms of advancement. Most of the greatest advancements that Rome had, they stole from conquered parties. In particular, when they conquered Syracuse and got their hands on a lot of Archimedes siege engines, that was a big example where the Romans tooled up without actually earning it themselves. They had got it from a conquered rival, or a conquered whatever party. And so moving from the very rigid forms of Latin, which was super useful, like I say, in engineering and having a cohesive and well-oiled machine of a bureaucracy, it limits you in terms of flexibility and advancement, which you would see later thanks to Dante's, and others' efforts to modernize the Italian language. And you see a similar thing that happened in World War II with the Germans versus the Americans. My grandfather, he at the end of the war was doing prisoner of war guarding of Germans that they had captured. And this German officer came up to him and was like, "You've got to explain it to me. Why did you guys, like, how did you possibly beat us?" And my grandfather was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "We had cracked all your codes. We knew all your movements. And again and again and again, we'd be waiting for you, for example, like in this specific pass, and we'd have a total ambush set up for you. But you Americans would talk to each other, and you didn't have, and it's rooted in language, you didn't have that same rigid hierarchy like we did. And you would suddenly go on your own because you found an easier, lazier route to move through the mountains through a different pass. And then we would be raiding, and you would suddenly be behind us and in front of us because you had disobeyed orders and you had gone your own way." And German is hyper precise, just like Latin, and it leads to fantastic marvels of engineering and extreme cohesion, which the Germans are famous for. English is the exact opposite. It's hyper flexible because it's really like 4 or 5 languages rammed together with Latin grammar somehow, like tossed in to make it extra insane. And so it's very difficult for other people to understand it the way native speakers can. And it's hyper flexible, and it leads to, well, look, in America, we revolted against our own language, right? We revolted against the British in part because it's enmeshed in that language of English being flexible and adaptable and ever evolving, whereas German is very much against evolution, and same thing with French is very much that way. And Germany and France are always kind of lagging behind the English in certain ways, even if they're better at certain specific things than the English are. And again, it's rooted in that language.
Yeah, that it made me think of P.G. Wodehouse. P.G. Wodehouse was my favorite writer. One thing that makes his writing so dazzling and funny and effervescent and powerful is that he goes from a very Shakespearean approach to language, just beautifully turned phrases, and then he'll throw in slang, American slang, British slang. He'll throw in some Latin phrases, and it just it sparkles because of that, the variation and the flexibility within in the language. So yeah, I love the English language.
I do too.
For that very reason. I think that's why a lot of people, non-native speakers, love the English language, because of what it affords them, what it offers to them. So
Phillip, I think this is a good place for us to maybe wrap up part 1, and then part 2 will come back, and I want to get right back into the Dante, and I think we're around 1306-ish, I think you said, or like early 1300s, and Dante inventing modern Italian.
1304. Yeah, we'll get through the rest of the history. It's quite powerful. So
yeah, fantastic. So we'll go ahead and stop here. And so, Phillip, I'm going to send you a new link. And so, viewers, thank you so much for watching. And I couldn't help myself, ended up talking more than I had meant to. It's just Phillip was sparking me with the great information he's providing. I knew almost nothing of what Phillip's been talking about. I mean, I know who Dante Alighieri is, of course.
And vice versa. That's how we get things done. So
right. And please put your hateful comments below about how one or both of us need to shut up, and we'll just have dead air on the. We'll have a Black Nobility forum where it's just dead air. That way, nobody gets angry that one of us talks too much, Phillip. We had a person, and I'm calling you out. I can't remember what your name was, and I don't really care. I've left the comment up. We had a person calling us out, and I said, well, I'm sorry you think I talk so much and blah, blah. And Phillip kindly leapt to my defense. And then the person said, well, you talk too much too. And I'm like, there's only 2 of us here. What are you talking about? We're supposed to have dead air? Like, we can't both be talking too much. That's impossible.
Right.
So, anyways, but they say once you get successful,
we could always, being more succinct, brevity is the soul of wit and all that. We could all,
we must be witless then, Phillip.
I'm always trying to improve my use of the English language. I'll never get there, but I'm going to keep trying. So. So we're going to take a quick break, and you'll send me another.
We'll take a quick break, and I'll send you the link.
Should we just stop, or should we?
Huh?
We
I'm
could
gonna.
just we
I
could
don't want
just
to pause it because then I have to find the spot to cut it, and it's more
ah
difficult. So I'll send you a new link if that's okay with you.
all righty.
And so, viewers, thank you
Okay.
so much for watching. And if you got this far and you haven't decided to unsubscribe and you are not yet subscribed, please do subscribe and hit that like button. And also share it with anyone that you think this or any other of the videos on the channel are intriguing to you and you think that you might have some friends that would like it. Helping us grow is what gets me and Phillip to find time. We're both very busy. We have a 16-hour time difference. Phillip is in Mongolia, which is so cool. I hope to visit him there someday. And so it's very difficult for us to do
Yeah.
it. And once we get to 1,000 subscribers, which the channel's very close now, I think it's at 891. It'll probably be 900 by the time this goes up, I hope. Once we get to 1,000, Phillip and I planned at some point to live streaming episodes where you can ask questions. I know there's some people who are really wanting to know, okay, this is all great and very intriguing, but how do I translate it into things like investment opportunities and so forth? And that might be a little shaky, but I can at least give some kind of insights on my thoughts on that. And so can Phillip. And then you can ask whatever kind of questions you might have and do super chats where you like, $1, $5, whatever. And then your question will be all highlighted and shiny. And then we can answer that. And then that's a way that this channel can be monetized without having annoying ads pop up. I can't help if YouTube puts them in, but I haven't authorized that and I never will. And that way, it's a way that Phillip and I can, get a little bit of income for the monumental amount of time that we've spent on this. So I would really appreciate it if you can like, subscribe, and especially share. Sharing is actually almost the most important thing you can do. But if you haven't subscribed and got this far, please hit that button, hit the bell, and then you can see the next episode of this. And so, Phillip, thank you so much. And I'll send you that link here shortly. And if you want to say anything to close, and then we'll stop it.
You said it all. So I'll wait for that next link. That's perfect.
I can see a comment already. Even Phillip said you said it all. Yeah. I leave them up though. I leave up negative comments. You have the right.
Absolutely.
You have the right to talk smack and say, Ian, shut the hell up. You talk too much. That is your right. You also have the right to, if it doesn't resonate with you, then that's fine. But, we're going to continue to have this be conversational. We're going to continue to have this be conversational. It's very important to both me and Phillip in the way that this is growing. There's sometimes when I do more formal-esque interviews, but Phillip and we're trying to spark a conversation here about how the world really works based on a tremendous amount of research both of us have done and arriving at similar conclusions from wildly different backgrounds and jumping off points. So, yeah. So thank you so much, viewer, and we'll catch you. For you, it'll be about a week when the next half of this is up. And Phillip, we'll do like 10 minutes here, maybe.
Okay. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Phillip, and thank you, viewer.